welcome to another episode of Public Opinion with your hosts, Pam and Vanetta. Hey, Vanetta.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, you know, we are coming off of a very tumultuous week. I'm telling you, there were things that was getting thrown at us from every direction.
And it's like every day it gets a little worse. Okay. You just feel like you had a sigh of relief on Tuesday. And what happens Tuesday evening?
Yeah, it was something. And then we're waiting to find out about another police. It's just a lot. It's a lot going on, but we're going to keep talking about it as long as we have.
That's right. We cannot become desensitized.
We cannot become desensitized. But you know what? This week we have a topic that is very near and dear to your heart.
Yes,
and that is the topic of autism. And this is Autism Awareness Month. And you want to just tell everybody what you do and why it is near and dear to your heart?
Okay. I am the special events director for the Milestones Autism Resources. And what I do is I bring awareness to our communities of outreach. I specifically try to work in communities of color because our children are not being diagnosed. And I know that makes a direct pipeline to prison. So I want to say that I have moved the needle. And because it's 1 in 54 individuals who are diagnosed with autism. And people just don't know these numbers are just increasing. And it's not that there are more significant issues, it's just the identification of it. That's what we know better today. Because when think about it, when you went to school, did you know anybody with autism?
You know, I didn't. You know, people would say, oh, somebody is special maybe, or but I'm not
different.
Really sure if I heard different. But I'm not really sure if I heard a lot of the word autism or it was just other words like that. Right. And now, you know, of course, that I've become an adult, I've heard this term autism spectrum, you know, like you can be on the whole spectrum, like a lot of stuff fits in, you know, to the spectrum.
It's very good. And it's an evolving science. I'll be honest with you. One of the first big known diagnosed cases where it was in the early 70s. Now, that's not that long ago.
No.
Okay. And so they gave it many other names like mental retardation. I mean, people don't want to say that, but that's where a connect came. And it was improper. That's not what it was.
Wow.
So we've evolved a lot. And the spectrum, we'll get into further what that is, but spectrum is really a helpful way of using this because autism is different in every person.
Okay, well, you know what? I am so glad that we're having this because it will educate me as well as a lot of other people who may not know a lot about autism, as well as bring attention to any way it affects Black and Brown communities and resources and that of that nature. So we're going to go ahead and meet our participants for this week. First, we have Ochanya McRoberts. Ochanya is the Director of Quality Assurance and Community Engagement at STEPS Educational Group. And then we have Connie Perrone. Connie is an indie filmmaker, educator, writer, wife, mother, and autism advocate. And finally, we have Tamara Bailey. Tamara is a program manager at the Centers for Families and Children. So let's get started and meet our participants for this week. Hi, and welcome. Thank you, ladies, so very much for agreeing to be participants on the show this week. And thank you so much for agreeing to answer the public opinion question. I cannot wait to see what your responses are and also to be able to educate myself because I really want to know a lot more about autism and how it affects our communities. So we are going to get started and see what the public opinion question is of the week. What barriers and or lack of resources, if any, exist in minority communities for parents of children on the autism spectrum? All right, so we're going to begin and I'm going to give each one of you 2 minutes to answer that. And we're going to start with Ochanya. So Ochanya, go ahead, your 2 minutes starts now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pamela. I think this answer is quite multifaceted, honestly. I don't have the experience as a parent on the end of this conversation, but as an administrator in special education, I see a variety of things that impede our families' ability to reach the resources they need. I think a good chunk of it boils down to awareness of those resources and also the communities that they live in. A lot of times these school districts don't always talk about different resources. I think also we've seen a lot of students with color who are diagnosed relatively late because we've been misdiagnosed in one capacity or another. And so I think as educational change has kind of taken a shift and we're paying closer attention to the fact that autism is in fact a spectrum, it allows us the opportunity to not miss those students who typically get left behind. So what I mean by that is sometimes you see students who are nonverbal. That student presents very, very different than a student who maybe has communicative language and they pay attention in class and they struggle in other ways that might be more social. So a lot of times those students are mislabeled. Whereas, you know, the students where the topography is a lot more evident that there's something going on, those students probably get the resources a lot faster. And so I think in a lot of our communities, our families, unfortunately, don't know the right questions to ask. They don't have the right tools or the right advocacy, quite frankly, to be able to advocate for their child. But also, I think there's a huge element of mistrust with Black and Brown folks when it comes to education and educational systems and how much trust we can put into those systems. And so someone writes home, they say your kid's struggling, right? Some parents will take that seriously. Other parents will take that personally. And that it goes back to an educational understanding that every child that needs support isn't just behavioral because, you know, they want to be. Kids do well when they can. And that's my philosophy on that. So I think Black and Brown communities specifically need more outreach, need more connectivity with best practices and getting away from the stigma that if your child needs extra support, there's something wrong with that. So.
Hey, excellent answer. And next we're going to hear from Connie. Go ahead, Connie.
Okay, well, Ochanya hit on a lot of things that I was going to touch on. So I'll just kind of elaborate on what she said. I can speak from my experience. You know, I have two children on the spectrum. One is 11, one is 20, one's a boy and one is a girl. And 20 years ago, oh my goodness, I will tell you that it's drastically different now. There are so many more resources than it was 20 years ago or even 11 years ago. But I met a woman this week and her son was diagnosed with, I think last month at the age of 3. And she was like, where do I go? What do I need to do? And Milestones is definitely an organization that kind of puts people in the right direction, points them in the right direction. You know, what resources are available. But she was still like, what do I do? I don't understand these terms. So for me, I feel like it's an overwhelming experience. And I still wish that there was kind of like an all-in-one guide that kind of walks parents through. This is what you do first after their diagnosis. What's the first number to call? And then when you do that, what's the next step? And then depending on how old the child is, like IEPs are always just this taboo that we don't really talk about. And a lot of parents sit in meetings and they're just like, okay, yes, yes. And they don't even know what to ask for. They don't know what the different acronyms mean. So they're kind of like taking it all in, but not really understanding how to implement an IEP, what to ask for. And then a lot of parents, I feel, especially of color, they feel like, okay, well, I'll send my child to school and all the services happen at, and they don't realize that when you get home, like there are services that you can ask for. And speech, OT, it extends beyond the school day. And a lot of families do not know that, especially the families of color. So I run into a lot of parents that are like, oh my God, I'm pulling my hair out. Like my child's spinning around. I'm tired from work. And I just want him to go to sleep. And he won't sleep. And he's really acting out at home. But that they can get help outside of the school district. So those are just a few of the barriers that I feel that we need to address in the Black and Brown communities so that parents don't feel so hopeless.
All right. Thank you. And now finally, Tamara, go ahead.
First, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you, Pamela and Vanessa, for inviting me. I don't have as much experience as everyone else. Like, my children are 3 and turning 9 actually this weekend. So I'm very new to this autistic community with them. I would say the biggest barrier for me as a parent was the diagnosis. Started out, I knew something was wrong, went to specialists, world-renowned specialists in New York City. They told me nothing was wrong, it's just speech delay. Even ended the meeting with asking me how did I even get the appointment. But I still knew something was wrong. Relocated to upstate New York, went up there, still the same thing. They wouldn't diagnose him properly. So finally I researched a neurologist. No one even told me I needed to see a neurologist for him. Went to, did my little research online, went to him, some African neurologist, and he finally diagnosed him autism. Now I can finally start the services. But there was no, like she was saying, there was no guide to what was next. They told me to contact early intervention. Early intervention, I would definitely say, was a huge, huge benefit. They let me know about all these other services that were available. But the problem with that is there's no funding. There's no funding for anything. And then if you come in Black or Brown, or you try to receive these services on a low income, they're not available for you. Or the wait list is 4 or 5 years, and by that time they're no longer eligible for early intervention services, and then you have to figure out the next step. So I would definitely say that is the hugest barrier as a parent. As you can see, one of mine back there after I told us to stay upstairs. But I would say that was the biggest one. And then another thing, and like you were saying, when you're in school for the IEPs, they do throw around a lot of acronyms, and it is very overwhelming, especially initially. Now, I did have a resource specialist with me for it, but I think the problem with the resource specialists are the human capital in this field is not great at that level. Let's be honest. They don't have social working skills. They're not culturally competent. There's just so many flaws in that I had to sit down and do research myself of what an IEP was, what kind of services may be there, the works, what kind of things I wanted to put inside there. When you sit down at those meetings, they tell you what they're going to give you.
What I will like to say is that we all know when you have a child on the spectrum, it's expensive. Mm-hmm. It's not the same life as if you have a typical child. I would like to know if you ladies have felt, though, in our community, okay, and we happen to all be Black, but Black and Brown, have you felt stigma that we bring upon ourselves from your relatives, from your neighbors? Have you all experienced that? Tell me, okay, Ochanya, you want to start?
Yes, that's honestly one of the hardest obstacles for me as an administrator. There's a huge stigma, and I think that I think it was Connie, you had mentioned that it's kind of taboo 20 years ago when people weren't really discussing autism. The causations were still kind of all over the place. I mean, and don't get me wrong, the causations are still all over the place, but getting to the root of why a Black or Brown parent is terrified of getting their child services is probably one of the hardest things I've had to do in my career. A lot of this is shaping, relabeling, shifting language, shifting mindset. We tend to look at behaviors as, very intentional, disrespectful, bad, those kinds of things. And having to kind of re-educate how the brain works and how some of these impulsivities are not what they appear to be. You can't go off of what something looks like. That takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of dedication and care. I've been blessed to be afforded the opportunity to be in a position where I can have some of these tough conversations. But some of my white colleagues really struggle because they don't get it and they don't know how to kind of address some of these things, or how to support, the families, because the stigmas are completely different in their communities. And so I think that, sometimes it's definitely the school district that's just cutting corners and not wanting to provide everything they can provide to ensure, that students who have the diagnosis get all the resources they need. But I also think that sometimes, unfortunately, Black and brown mamas and daddies, we drag our feet, and we take our time with embracing what our kids actually need, and trusting that if someone's prescribing something that our children actually need, that we say, okay, yes, they say he needs speech therapy X number of minutes, a week, or he needs ABA therapy X number of minutes a week. Even if it's a convenience or an improvisation, like on something that we're doing, at the end of the day, it's for the kid. And sometimes that's a really tough conversation to have. So it's a lot. It's a lot of re-education for everyone involved, the staff, the students, the families, everybody.
Thank you. Tamara?
I would definitely say it's just a cultural thing. We rely on our family's opinion a lot more than some other cultures do. So we usually, the thing I always hear is, I had kids, I already took care of kids, like, just leave them. It's not that simple. And I do understand it's coming from a place of love, but I think mainly it is that. And then there's another thing, the parents is like, at least for me, it's me facing my mortality, like what's gonna happen to my child when I'm gone, kind of a thing. And it's easier to try to ignore it for the moment, but at the end of the day, I have to make sure he's okay when I'm gone, or at least able to be self-sufficient.
I definitely understand. Connie?
Okay, that's a very big question and a necessary question, because my husband is his family's from Guyana, so they live in New York City. My husband's originally from New York City, and of course I am African American, and born and raised in a Pentecostal church. So interestingly enough, when my daughter was probably 2, I, as her mother, I was like, something is not right. She was our first child, but I'm like, she's not doing what other kids do. And like, she's kind of off to herself a little bit more. She could talk and point and do all those things. So no one knew right away, but I, in my gut, knew something was wrong. And I mentioned it to my mother, and my mother was just like, you're looking for something, don't worry about it. She'll be fine. And so when she would do little things, not necessarily my mother, but other aunts would be like, you should spank her. And I'm like, I don't think that that's what it is. And I'm not going to do that because I just felt like it was something else. And my husband's family, they were kind of like my mom's family, just like, just kind of let it go and don't worry about it. She'll correct herself, it'll be fine. And then by the time she was 4.5, I was like, something is really not right. And when she was diagnosed, my mother was just like, we're not going to accept that. And I was like, but that's what it is. And my mother was just like, we're going to pray. I'm like, okay, but she's still going to have autism. And eventually everyone accepted, they always loved her. So fortunately I have 2 sisters and 3 brothers. We have a very big family, and my husband has a big family as well. So they never felt like after the diagnosis that it was like, oh my God, here they come with that autistic child. Everyone treated her like everyone else. And I will say, like, when we're at family events, my sister, when we go to her house, she's like, okay, I have this room set aside. So if Cheyenne needs to get away for a minute with her iPad, I have her all set up right here. Like, my family understands and they look out for us in a way that I guess happened organically, but that's not the case for most families. I do have a friend whose family is like, don't bring that child here. because they break things, they throw tantrums, and we want to have a nice barbecue. I haven't experienced that in my family, but it is still very difficult for a lot of people of color because their child is looked at as bad or, loud. And we don't necessarily have the right tools as a community to talk about accepting these children and figuring out how to regulate or put them in an environment where there's probably not so much loud music playing at the barbecue. But we need to have those conversations. So I think this platform is absolutely spectacular because I've never been a part of a discussion with women of color about this. So this is huge for even me. And I know that other parents will start coming out of the woodwork. It's like, oh my God, like we can talk about this. Can we devise tools to strategize how to help our families better understand what we're going through? So there is a stigma, but I think things like this will start to really kind of blow the lid on what we've been dealing with for so many years in silence.
Excellent.
I'd like somebody to say, and then maybe Vanetta, you could even just what exactly is autism? Because what all of you all were saying is some people may think it's a behavioral problem, like, okay, your child is acting out. Why don't you, so what exactly is autism? I know it affects children different ways and people different ways. So what exactly is it?
Chandra will be the best person to answer this, but what I want to say first is that autism is different in every person. And if you want to know the truth, I believe all of us carry some characteristic of it, okay? We all have behaviors that if you sat down and really evaluated them, they are on the spectrum of autism. Chandra.
I was just about to say that, like, I think all of us have our little isms, whether we like bounce our foot when we're at a table or click our pens, or we're all like either running away from sensory input or seeking it out in some kind of capacity. So I agree with that, Vanetta, a great deal. But so I do a lot of training in my current position with a lot of my new hires for the agency that I work for. And when you think about the characteristics of autism and the things that autism will impede, you're looking at three top things. You're looking at education, socialization, and communication. Okay, so typically those three things are the things that are the most impacted with an individual who's diagnosed with autism. But some kids are really great at, the education piece, and they're light years ahead, and they're gifted, and, they're bored out of their minds in traditional class because they're under challenged or whatever, but socially and communicatively, they may struggle. Or you have a kid who, may not have the best expressive language. So communication is impacted, but they communicate with an iPad and they're cracking jokes. So it's really just a continuum of skills and services and supports. Everybody's different, as Vanetta mentioned earlier. But I think that in terms of the DSM and what we're looking for that diagnostic criteria, those are those three specific areas that we typically identify as a struggle. A lot of our kids too have difficulty with different sensory input. And so you'll see a lot of comorbidity. There might be some sensory processing disorders like on top of the autism, which are really, really difficult to kind of sort through. When you think of kids that have multiple things going on, imagine, being a clinician or a diagnostician and figuring out how to categorize or in a hierarchical way, like identify which of these issues is impeding this child's learning the most. Okay, so they're this first, and then they have that, and then they have that. Our kids come with a lot, a lot of the rigidity, the tendencies, what we would call in a neurotypical person as OCD, right? Some of our kids with autism are just extremely rigid, and they carry those same tendencies and topography. So it really is a different set of circumstances, but I'm glad that in terms of our diagnostic criteria, we've gotten a lot better at identifying things in a way that we can, work with our students earlier and get that early intervention in place. Not to cure, because that's not what we focus on, but rather providing those skill sets and teaching those skills so they can acclimate as much as possible. And honestly, like I don't fully believe in making a kid fit in. I think we need to adjust the way we look at our social norms and our social constructs so our kids just fit in better, if that makes sense. So not us changing them, but us changing ourselves so they have a place in our society.
And Connie and Tamara, how would you say it's important to be proactive as parents and making sure you're staying on top of whatever needs to be done? And what can people do who may not be as savvy, like you all have said, as maybe some other people who may already know about it? But what do parents have to do in order to really educate themselves so that you can really be proactive for your children?
I would definitely say just being very involved in school. It is so easy for them to fall in between the cracks when you don't pay attention, or when you just think that the school is going to handle it. When my son first started school, I just automatically assumed, okay, fine, they have IEP, we have a plan, they're going to follow through with it. I want to say 9 months down the road, they're telling me, oh no, we have behavioral issues. And I'm like, well, why didn't anybody tell me? I did not think that that was going to be a thing in school because he, was in a special program and just providing all these additional services. So I would definitely say keeping an eye on what's going on in school, keeping constant contact. ABA was a miracle. Oh my gosh, that service was a godsend for me. Just following up with the extra activities, the extra speech therapy, extra OT. A lot of the times they will try to drop that OT off, saying, your child, their gross motor skills are fine or acute skills are fine, but you notice that their hand penmanship is horrible. So those are things that you can continue to get services for. Don't just allow them to take those things off. So being a very boisterous advocate for your child is what I would say is the biggest thing.
I totally agree with Tamara. My experience, what I would say, for me, when my daughter was first diagnosed, because it was so long ago, 20 years ago, it was, there were no ready tools for me or numbers that I could call right away. So for me, what I had to do, being a filmmaker, I tapped into what I'm good at. And so for me, it was creating videos to help her communicate and to learn what not to do and what to do in certain situations. And it was tedious, but that's what I knew best. So what I did was tap into what I was really good at. And my husband, he was going to school for physical therapy. And his thing was massage, making sure that they know how to relax. And so for him, he applied just different techniques and even taught me because I didn't really know about deep pressure at the time, but that's what it was. Because we have our son who's 11, he stims a lot, he jumps around a lot, he's very busy and he's nonverbal. So for him, there's certain trigger points to kind of help him calm down. If you touch his shoulders and apply deep pressure.
Connie, tell him what stimming is.
Stimming is when, so my son, he flaps his arms a lot. So something that is done repetitively, that's what my son does. For him, it's flapping his arms. For my daughter, she does the rocking motion. Some children do it, some don't, but my two do, and they do it very differently. And there are certain things that they're trying to do, like regulate their bodies. If there's a loud sound that's kind of overwhelming, they tend to lean towards a coping mechanism, which is stimming or flapping their arms or whatever. So what we discovered is that there's just different trigger points on their bodies. Like my daughter, she likes for you to just gently caress her temples. And when we were younger at this, we didn't know all the terms, but now fast forward 20 years later, and so there are different techniques. And so what I advise other parents to do is find out, I mean, education is great. I feel like a lot of parents focus on like, my child is not reading like other typical children. My thing is trying to find out what works for the child that you have, their particular type of autism, and then allowing them to teach you instead of us trying to impose what we want them to be. It is really for us, my husband and I, we had to look at them and learn from them and learn how to care for them. So it wasn't all about what we thought or the doctors thought. Our thing was trying to figure out the individual here and trying to go with them and see where they lead us. And I think that is something that not just Black and brown people, but just any parent who's dealing with a child with autism, a lot of times we're trying to, like another panelist said, we're just trying to fix them and make them like everyone else. And that's not the case. We need to kind of step back and see what they want to tell us and what we can learn from them. So I think that is one of the first steps. And then that will kind of direct you into where you should be looking for resources. Should your child do more OT, or should you be doing some type of speech therapy in addition to maybe deep pressure and compression therapy, massaging? Is it something that has to do with the gluten or the dairy? So on the child, but I think really focusing on your child and allowing them to teach you how to better help them is more important.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time. This has been very, very interesting. I'm telling you, and I'm sure that it's very helpful for other people as well, and other parents to see, like you stated, Connie, that you don't really see a whole lot of discussions like this, especially amongst Black women, and just talking about your children and letting other people know that your children are fine. They're different, but they'll be fine, and they'll be even better if the community understands autism. Right. And provides the necessary resources that you all need so that your children can continue to be fine. And did either one of you have anything in closing that you wanted to make sure you said before you leave?
Well, I have something. Let me say this. I feel honored to have the opportunity to work for the families of autism. I have never seen more extraordinary warriors than a parent of a child with autism. I don't want to get in your way. All I want to do is ride with you because you are moving fast and making a difference. And you ladies have something to offer. I want you to tell your story everywhere you go. And when you go, don't accept the looks. Explain to people what's going on, because we don't have a right to judge you. Let me say, all of us have children and all of them behave in manners we don't want on occasion. I got 3 and they all behaved in manners that I don't like, and they're grown. So be that advocate, be loud and proud about it, and don't allow yourself to be judged.
All right. Thank you, ladies, so much. Well, Vanetta, that was amazing. I really learned so much. I'm just very impressed with those women.
They are something.
And I really learned a lot. And I hopefully this will teach a lot of people, give them a better understanding of autism and some of the barriers and things that people go through who have autistic children.
I hope it will. And I hope that these women will get a change where when they go out, people look at them differently. Okay, these are mothers, they love their children, and the world, we don't make the world change for them, and you should make the child change for the world. I mean, they're full. Everybody wants an opportunity. Give these children an opportunity. And the thing about it, some of the benefits of autism are extraordinary. If you run across a person with autism, they're typically very honest, dependable, and they have a kindness that's unmatched.
Wow. Well, you know what? This was wonderful. And if you enjoyed this segment, please like and subscribe to our channel. And we will see you next time for another episode of Public Opinion, because everybody's entitled to their own opinion.